Ambassador Zekthar had seen many worlds burn. In his 400 cycles serving the Galactic Council, he had witnessed the Krelon expansion wars, the Silicon Uprising, and the devastating hive mind conflicts that left entire star systems as lifeless husks. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, standing on the observation deck of the neutral vessel Times Harmony's Edge *, watching the blue-green world of Kepler 442b through reinforced viewports. The planet below was dying. What had once been a thriving colony world shared by 3 species was now a smoking wasteland. The Vorthan Empire had arrived 6 months ago with their massive dreadnoughts, claiming ancient territorial rights. The peaceful settlers, mostly Altarian farmers and Centauran engineers, had fled to the underground shelters. Those who couldn't escape in time became casualties in what military analysts coldly termed area denial operations. Zekthar's tentacles twitched with nervous energy as he adjusted his translator unit. Beside him stood Fleet Admiral Korvesh of the Vorthan Empire, a towering reptilian whose scales gleamed like polished metal under the ship's artificial lighting. The Admiral's 4 arms were crossed in a gesture that spoke of absolute confidence. "Your concern is noted, Ambassador," Korvesh hissed through his translator. "But this world legally belongs to the Empire. The settlers were trespassers. We have acted within galactic law." Zekthar's 3 eyes focused on the burning cities below. "Legal, perhaps, but hardly moral. 17 million civilians. Admiral, the Council will not forget this. The Council will do nothing," Korvesh replied with a dismissive wave of his primary arm. "As always, you talk and debate while the strong take what they need. This world has rare earth elements essential to our expansion. Sentiment cannot override necessity." The ambassador was about to respond when his aide, a young Etherean named Luzara, approached with obvious urgency. Her luminescent skin pulsed rapidly, a clear sign of distress among her people. "Ambassador, we're receiving multiple hyperspace signatures, large vessels approaching the system's edge." Zekthar turned to the communications station. "Put it on the main display." The viewport shimmered and transformed into a tactical readout. Dozens of blips appeared at the system's edge, moving at impossible speeds. The ship's computer began analyzing the signatures, cross-referencing them against the galactic database. Admiral Korvesh straightened, his predatory instincts activated. Pirates? Mercenaries? No independent group would dare interfere with Imperial operations. The computer finished its analysis, and Zekthar felt his blood freeze. The species designation that appeared on the screen was one that sent ripples of unease through even the most hardened military commanders across the galaxy. "Terrans," Luzara whispered, her skin now pulsing so rapidly it appeared almost solid white. Korvesh's 4 arms dropped to his sides. "Impossible. The Human Confederation doesn't involve itself in territorial disputes. They maintain strict neutrality in all conflicts outside their borders." Zekthar had studied the humans extensively during his diplomatic career. They were a young species, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 centuries ago. By galactic standards, they were children. Yet in those 3 short centuries, they had done something no other species had managed in 50,000 years of recorded galactic history. They had never lost a war, not once. It wasn't that they were the strongest species, or the most technologically advanced. The Vorthan Empire commanded greater numbers. The crystalline collective possessed superior energy weapons. The hive minds could coordinate billions of units with perfect efficiency. But when humans went to war, their enemies simply stopped existing. The first ship to emerge from hyperspace was unlike anything in the standard military databases. It was smaller than a Vorthan dreadnought, sleeker than an Altarian cruiser, but there was something about its design that spoke of deadly purpose. Where other species built ships that looked like monuments to their power or artistic expressions of their culture, human vessels looked like they were built to kill. Identification beacon shows it as the Times Enduring Spirit *, Terran Confederation Navy, the communications officer reported. Admiral Chen Yiming commanding. Korvesh's inner eyelids flickered, a sign of deep thought among his species. 1 ship. They send 1 ship against the 16th Imperial Fleet? But even as he spoke, more ships were arriving. Not the massive formations that other species favored, but small squadrons of those sleek, predatory vessels. Each one broadcast the same signal: Terran Confederation Navy, with names that spoke of human history and values. Asterisk Liberty's Dawn asterisk. Asterisk Gettysburg's Promise asterisk. Asterisk Normandy Rising asterisk. Asterisk Iwo Jima's Fury asterisk. Admiral Corvesh. The communication system crackled to life with a new voice. It spoke in perfect Vorthan, with just a hint of an accent that marked it as translated from the human language. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran vessel Time's Enduring Spirit asterisk. You are ordered to cease all military operations against civilian targets and withdraw your forces from this system immediately. The Vorthan Admiral's scales darkened with rage. You dare give orders to the Vorthan Empire? This world is ours by right of ancient claim. Your species has no authority here. There was a pause before the human admiral responded. When he did, his voice carried a weight that made even Zekthar, safe aboard a neutral vessel, feel a chill. Admiral, I'm going to explain this once, clearly, so there's no misunderstanding. 6 hours ago, the Altarian government formally requested humanitarian intervention under the Sapient Rights Protocol. The Terran Confederation has accepted this request. The 17 million civilians you've been bombarding are now under our protection. Corvesh's laugh was like grinding metal. 17 million refugees against the 16th Imperial Fleet? You brought 40 ships, Admiral Chen. I have 600. The mathematics are quite clear. Mathematics? Admiral Chen repeated thoughtfully. Yes, let's talk about mathematics. You have 600 ships, mostly older models, with approximately 4 million crew members total. Average combat experience among your fleet is 12 years. Your ships are designed for overwhelming firepower against static targets. The human paused, and Zekthar could almost hear the smile in his voice. I have 40 ships with 200,000 crew members. Average combat experience is 37 years. Our ships are designed to kill other ships very quickly and efficiently. More importantly, Admiral, every single person under my command has volunteered to be here. Can you say the same about your conscripts? Luzara was monitoring communication channels across the system. Ambassador, the human ships are taking position around the planet. They're not forming a battle line. It's more like they're surrounding something. Zekthar activated his personal scanner, studying the tactical display. The human ships weren't positioning themselves for a traditional space battle. Instead, they were creating overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible escape route from the planet's surface. It was as if they had instantly analyzed the entire Vorthan fleet deployment and created a perfect killing field. Admiral Corvesh, the human voice continued. You now have two options. You can withdraw your forces immediately, in which case you'll be allowed to leave this system peacefully. Or you can choose to continue this operation, in which case, I'm authorized to demonstrate why the galaxy regards humans the way it does. The Vorthan Admiral's scales were now completely black with fury. You threaten the Empire? We will crush you like insects. All ships. Attack Pattern 7. Destroy the human vessels. What happened next changed everything Zekthar thought he knew about warfare. The human ships didn't wait for the Vorthan fleet to attack. They didn't form defensive positions or call for reinforcements. Instead, they simply vanished. Where did they go? Corvesh demanded, his forearms gesticulating wildly at his tactical displays. The answer came in the form of explosions. Not the massive, showy displays that most species favored, but precise, surgical strikes that appeared throughout the Vorthan formation. Dreadnoughts that had taken decades to build simply came apart, their reactors breached with frightening accuracy. Command ships found their bridges separated from their hulls by weapons that seemed to ignore traditional defensive systems. Cloaking technology, Luzara breathed. But that's supposed to be impossible on ships that large. The power requirements alone. The human ships became visible again, but only long enough to fire another volley before disappearing once more. They moved through space like ghosts, appearing just long enough to deliver death before vanishing again. The Vorthan fleet, designed for massive frontal assaults, found itself fighting shadows. Admiral Corvesh's flagship, the massive dreadnought times Empire's Fist *, shuddered as something struck its starboard side. The admiral himself was thrown across his command deck as secondary explosions rippled through his ship. "Damage report," he roared. "Primary engines offline. Weapons systems compromised. Hull breaches on 17 decks." His tactical officer reported. Through the chaos, Admiral Chen's voice came across the communication system, calm and professional. "Admiral Corvesh, this is your final warning. Withdraw immediately, or face complete destruction." Zekthar watched in horrified fascination as the Vorthan fleet, one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, was systematically dismantled by a force less than 1/10 its size. The humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't rely on overwhelming numbers or superior firepower. Instead, they fought with a precision and efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. "How are they doing this?" Luzara whispered. Zekthar had studied the humans for decades, but only now was he beginning to understand what made them so terrifying. Other species evolved on worlds where cooperation meant survival. They built societies based on consensus and group dynamics. Humans evolved differently. They evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them, where cooperation meant planning to kill something else more efficiently. Every human ship moved as if it knew exactly where every other human ship would be at any given moment. They didn't communicate through traditional channels, instead relying on what appeared to be pure instinct. But it wasn't instinct, Zekthar realized. It was something far more dangerous. It was practice. The humans had spent their entire recorded history learning how to kill efficiently. Not for conquest or expansion, but for survival. They had taken those skills and refined them over centuries of what they called war games, elaborate simulations where they fought phantom enemies again and again, until perfect coordination became second nature. The last of the Vorthan ships fell silent, its hull breached and atmosphere venting into space. Admiral Corvesh's flagship drifted powerless, its proud red banners torn and floating in the void. "Admiral Corvesh." Admiral Chen's voice cut through the silence. "Your fleet has been neutralized. Your crew is alive. But your ships are combat ineffective. Emergency beacons have been activated for search and rescue operations. You have 12 hours to evacuate all personnel to the refugee ships we're providing." Corvesh's voice, when it finally came, was hollow with defeat. "How? How did you do this? We outnumbered you 15-1. There was a long pause before Admiral Chen responded. "Admiral, you made the same mistake everyone makes when they fight humans. You assumed we were just another species playing by the same rules everyone else follows. We're not. We don't fight fair. We don't fight for honor or glory. We fight to win, and we've had a very long time to figure out how to do that efficiently." Zekthar felt something cold settle in his heart as he watched the human ships take up positions around the planet. They moved with casual efficiency, as if the destruction of an entire battle fleet was just another day's work. In the space of 30 minutes, they had turned one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces into floating scrap metal. But more disturbing than their combat effectiveness was their restraint. They could have easily killed every Vorthan in the system. Instead, they had precisely disabled each ship, ensuring maximum tactical effect while minimizing casualties. It was a level of control that spoke of absolute confidence and comprehensive preparation. As rescue ships arrived to collect Vorthan survivors, Admiral Chen's voice filled the communication channels one final time. "To any vessels monitoring this engagement, please note that the planet Kepler 442b is now under Terran protection. The civilian population will be evacuated to safety and relocated according to their wishes. Normal commerce and trade may resume once the evacuation is complete." Zekthar stared at the tactical display, where 40 human ships now maintained perfect formation around the planet. In 30 minutes, they had accomplished what would have taken any other species months of careful negotiation and political maneuvering. They had simply arrived, stated their position, and when challenged, had demonstrated why the galaxy had learned to give humans a very wide berth. "Ambassador," Luzara whispered, her skin now pulsing with deep purple anxiety patterns. "Should we file a report with the Council?" Zekthar's 3 eyes remained fixed on the human ships. File a report, yes. But not about what we witnessed here today. File a report recommending that the Council never, under any circumstances, give the humans a reason to consider us a threat. As the neutral vessel prepared to leave the system, Zekthar found himself thinking about the human admiral's words. They didn't fight fair. They didn't fight for honor or glory. They fought to win. And that, he was beginning to realize, was exactly why the galaxy held its breath whenever humans went to war. 3 days after the Battle of Kepler, 442b, as it was already being called in galactic news feeds, Ambassador Zekthar found himself doing something he had never done before in his 4 centuries of diplomatic service. He had requested permission to visit the surface of a human-controlled world. The Times-enduring Spirit Times hung in orbit like a metal predator, its angular hull reflecting the light of the system's binary stars. Smaller human vessels moved around it in careful patterns, their crews working with mechanical precision to coordinate the massive evacuation effort below. Admiral Chen had agreed to the ambassador's request with surprising warmth, mentioning that he was always happy to help the Council understand human operations better. The shuttle that carried Zekthar and his aide Luzara to the surface was unlike any transport he had ever experienced. Where most species built shuttles for comfort or ceremonial display, the human craft was purely functional. Every surface served a purpose. Every component was designed for efficiency and reliability. Even the seats seemed designed more for quick deployment than comfort. The human pilot, a young woman with short, dark hair and steady hands, spoke with casual confidence over the intercom. Ambassador, we'll be landing at Evacuation Site 7 in about 10 minutes. Fair warning. It's pretty chaotic down there. We're processing about 50,000 refugees per hour through this site alone. Zekthar activated his translator and leaned forward. 50,000 per hour? How is that possible with the infrastructure damage? The pilot glanced back with a slight smile. Sir, when humans decide to move people, we move people. You'll see. As the shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, Zekthar got his first clear view of what the humans had accomplished in just 3 days. The landscape below had been transformed from a war zone into something resembling a massive, organized city. Temporary structures stretched for kilometers, connected by wide roads where vehicles moved in steady streams. Landing pads dotted the area like geometric flowers, with shuttles arriving and departing in perfectly timed sequences. How many humans are down there? Luzara asked, her skin pulsing with amazement. According to our briefing, Zekthar consulted his datapad. Admiral Chen deployed 12,000 personnel for the evacuation operation. The shuttle touched down with barely a vibration. As the doors opened, Zekthar was hit by a wave of sound unlike anything he had experienced. It wasn't the chaos he expected, but rather the sound of organized efficiency on a massive scale. Voices calling out instructions, the hum of machinery, the constant movement of vehicles and equipment, all of it somehow coordinated into a symphony of purposeful activity. A human approached the shuttle, a tall woman with graying hair and the kind of bearing that marked her as someone accustomed to command. She wore practical clothing with rank insignias that identified her as a senior officer. Ambassador Zekthar? I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, Ground Operations Commander. Admiral Chen asked me to show you around. Her translator rendered her words in perfect Etherian, with appropriate tonal adjustments for respect and friendliness. As they walked through the evacuation site, Zekthar found himself struggling to process what he was seeing. The humans had essentially built a temporary city from nothing in less than 72 hours. But more impressive than the physical infrastructure was the way they worked. Every human he observed seemed to know exactly what they were doing and where they needed to be. They moved with purpose but without panic. Coordinated but without obvious central control. It was like watching a complex dance performed by thousands of dancers who had somehow memorized every step. Colonel, Zekthar said as they paused at an overlook that gave them a view of the entire site. How do you coordinate all this without constant communication? I don't see command and control centers like other militaries use. Colonel Martinez smiled, and Zekthar noticed something he hadn't seen in the other species he had worked with over the centuries. There was genuine warmth in her expression, but underneath it was something harder. A readiness that suggested she could shift from helpful diplomat to deadly warrior in seconds if the situation required it. That's because you're thinking about this the wrong way, Ambassador. We don't coordinate this. We all just know how to do our jobs, and we trust that everyone else knows how to do theirs. She gestured toward a group of humans setting up what appeared to be a medical facility. Sergeant Kim over there has set up field hospitals on 17 different worlds. She doesn't need someone to tell her where the trauma units should go or how to arrange the supply lines. She's done it so many times it's automatic. Zekthar watched the sergeant in question directing her team with quick hand signals and brief verbal commands. The facility was taking shape with remarkable speed, and he could see that each person working on it knew exactly what their role was without needing detailed instructions. But how do they know how to work together so smoothly? Your species has only been spacefaring for 3 centuries. Ambassador, Colonel Martinez said quietly. Humans have been refugees for most of our recorded history. We've had to move entire populations quickly more times than we care to count. War, natural disasters, famine, plague. Our species learned a long time ago that sometimes the only way to survive is to pack up everything and move somewhere safer as fast as possible. They continued walking, passing through sections where Altarian families were being processed for relocation. The aliens looked exhausted and traumatized, but the humans working with them showed infinite patience. Zekthar watched a young human medic, barely out of adolescence by the look of her, carefully examining an elderly Altarian's injuries while speaking soothingly in perfect Altarian dialect. Where did she learn to speak Altarian so well? Luzara asked. Colonel Martinez checked a datapad. Corporal Johnson? She spent the last 2 years on relief missions in the Altarian colonies. Before that, she did disaster response in the Centauron systems. Most of our people who volunteer for humanitarian missions speak at least 4 or 5 galactic languages fluently. Volunteer? Zekthar's translation unit had to repeat the word to make sure it was correct. Every person you see here volunteered for this mission, Ambassador. Admiral Chen put out a call for humanitarian response teams, and we had more volunteers than we could transport. We had to turn away 3 times as many people as we brought. Zekthar felt one of his hearts skip a beat. You mean the humans who destroyed the Vorthan fleet? They're here now helping evacuate the people they saved? Of course. The same people who fought the space battle are down here building refugee camps and processing evacuation requests. Admiral Chen is personally overseeing the medical triage center about 2 kilometers north of here. They stopped at a large shelter where families were gathering for transport to new homes. Zekthar watched human volunteers distributing supplies and helping organize travel groups. The interactions were gentle, patient, and professional. These were the same people who had systematically destroyed one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces just 3 days ago. Colonel Martinez, Zekthar said carefully, I've studied human military history. Your species has a reputation for being efficient in warfare. But this, he gestured around them, this is something else entirely. The colonel was quiet for a moment, watching a human engineer help an Altarian child who had lost a toy. The engineer had stopped her important work to spend 10 minutes helping the child search through the family's belongings until the toy was found. Ambassador, can I tell you something that might help you understand humans better? Zekthar activated his recording device. Please. Every human here has been trained for warfare since they were old enough to hold a weapon. We start learning tactics and strategy in childhood games. We study historical battles in school. We practice coordination and teamwork in sports and exercises. By the time a human reaches adulthood, they have been preparing for war their entire life. She paused, watching the engineer return the toy to the delighted child. But here's what most other species don't understand about us. We don't train for war because we love fighting. We train for war so that we can protect people who can't protect themselves. Every human in this evacuation zone is here because someone, somewhere, needed help. And we decided that was more important than whatever else we might be doing. Zekthar felt his understanding of humans shift fundamentally. You're saying that your military effectiveness serves a humanitarian purpose? I'm saying our humanitarian effectiveness is our military effectiveness, Ambassador. The same skills that make us dangerous in warfare. Coordination, efficiency, quick decision-making, adaptability. Those are exactly the skills you need to move 17 million refugees safely. They walked toward the main landing field, where the largest evacuation transports were arriving and departing in continuous cycles. Zekthar watched the loading process with growing amazement. Families were organized into groups, provided with supplies, given medical screenings, and assigned transport, all in less than 20 minutes per family. "Where are they all going?" Luzara asked. "Wherever they want to go," Colonel Martinez replied simply. "Some are requesting transport back to Altarian space. Others want to join relatives in Centauran colonies. We've had about 2,000 families request asylum in human space." Zekthar's three eyes widened. "You're accepting refugees permanently?" "The Terran Confederation has accepted refugees from 47 different species over the last century, Ambassador. Current estimates put our non-human population at about 60 million individuals across our colonies. Some of them are multi-generational residents now." The implications of this hit Zekthar like a physical blow. The humans weren't just militarily effective. They were building a multi-species civilization within their borders. No other species in galactic history had successfully integrated significant populations from other worlds without cultural conflicts or economic problems. How do you manage cultural differences, language barriers, different biological needs? Colonel Martinez smiled again, and this time Zekthar could see pride in her expression. "Ambassador, humans have been dealing with cultural differences since before we left our home world. We have hundreds of different cultures and languages just among our own species. Adding a few dozen alien cultures to the mix wasn't as hard as you might think." As they approached one of the transport ships, Zekthar observed something that made him stop in amazement. The human crew loading refugees included several non-humans. An Altarian wearing human military insignia was directing the arrangement of family groups, while a Centauran engineer was overseeing the ship's technical systems. "Those are human military personnel?" he asked. "Citizen soldiers," Colonel Martinez confirmed. "About 15% of our military is non-human at this point. They volunteer for service just like human citizens do, and they're trained to the same standards." Zekthar thought about the battle 3 days ago, where human ships had moved with perfect coordination against the Vorthon fleet. Some of those crews might have included alien personnel, working seamlessly alongside humans in the most demanding military operations. A loud warning signal interrupted his thoughts. Across the evacuation site, humans immediately began moving with increased urgency. But it wasn't panic. It was the kind of swift, organized response that spoke of extensive training and preparation. "What's happening?" Luzara asked, nervously. Colonel Martinez was already checking her communication device. "Weather alert. There's a massive storm system moving in from the east. We've got about 4 hours to finish evacuating this sector and move operations to a safer location." Zekthar watched in fascination as the entire evacuation site began transforming itself. Equipment was rapidly packed away, temporary structures were disassembled, and refugee groups were reorganized for faster processing. What had taken 3 days to build was being safely dismantled in hours. "Have you done this before?" he asked. "Emergency relocation under severe weather conditions?" "Oh, yes. This is actually part of our standard training. Every evacuation site we build is designed to be packed up and moved quickly if conditions change." As they walked back toward the landing area, Zekthar found himself thinking about the galactic community's reaction to human military activities. Every species in the galaxy had heard stories about human warfare, but those stories focused on their tactical effectiveness and technological capabilities. What the stories missed was the underlying motivation that drove everything humans did. They weren't conquerors seeking expansion or glory. They were protectors who had turned survival skills into an art form, and then dedicated that art to helping others survive. "Colonel Martinez," Zekthar said as they approached his waiting shuttle, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Ambassador. Why did you volunteer for this mission? You could have stayed home, lived peacefully in human space. Why come here to help aliens you've never met?" The colonel was quiet for a long moment, watching human and refugee families working together to prepare for the storm. When she answered, her voice carried the weight of personal conviction. Ambassador. My grandmother used to tell me a story about our family history. During one of the wars on our home world, my great-great-grandmother was a refugee fleeing from a conflict zone. She was carrying my great-grandmother, who was just a baby at the time, and they got separated from the rest of the family. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. They probably would have died, but a group of soldiers from a different army, people who had no reason to help them, and every reason to keep moving, stopped what they were doing and made sure my family got to safety. Those soldiers probably never thought about it again, but their decision meant that 4 generations of my family got to exist. Colonel Martinez looked directly at Zekthar with those steady human eyes. Every family we're helping here today might have 4 more generations because we decided to stop what we were doing and help. That seems like a pretty good reason to me. As the shuttle lifted off, carrying Zekthar back to the diplomatic vessel, he found himself looking down at the human evacuation site with new understanding. The same species that could dismantle a battle fleet in 30 minutes was working around the clock to save every single civilian on a world they had no claim to, asking nothing in return. The galaxy held its breath when humans went to war, but not because they were afraid of human conquest or expansion. They were afraid because humans represented something unprecedented in galactic civilization, a species that had achieved perfect efficiency in warfare, not for the sake of power, but for the sake of protecting others. And that, Zekthar realized, made them the most dangerous allies and the most terrible enemies the galaxy had ever known. 6 months later, Ambassador Zekthar stood before the Galactic Council's full assembly on the neutral world of Concord Prime. The massive chamber, carved from living crystal that amplified sound and projected holographic displays throughout its cathedral-like space, held representatives from 347 species. As the senior ambassador for interspecies relations, Zekthar had the floor to present his findings on what was being called the human question. The events at Kepler 442b had sent shockwaves throughout galactic civilization. In a single engagement, the humans had demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption the older species held about warfare and diplomacy. More disturbing, they had done so while conducting the largest humanitarian operation in recorded galactic history. Zekthar activated his presentation system, and the chamber filled with tactical displays from the battle. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates as they watched human ships systematically dismantle the Vorthan fleet with surgical precision. Honored delegates, Zekthar began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. For 6 months, we have debated the implications of human military capabilities. Some have called for restrictions on human expansion. Others have suggested we must develop countermeasures to their technology. I stand before you today to say that we are asking the wrong questions entirely. Council Leader Threndok, an ancient crystalline whose consciousness spanned multiple crystalline bodies, resonated with harmonic inquiry. Ambassador Zekthar, surely you cannot suggest we ignore the threat these humans represent? Zekthar's 3 eyes focused on the tactical display, where human ships moved like deadly dancers through the Vorthan formation. Honored leader, with respect, the humans are not the threat. They are the solution to a problem we never knew we had. Confused harmonics echoed from several delegations. The HiveMind Collective's representative, Speaker Prime Unit 7744, projected its thoughts through the translation matrix. Clarification requested. Human tactical efficiency represents unprecedented danger to established order. How does this constitute a solution? Because, honored delegates, we have spent 50,000 years building a galactic civilization based on a fundamental lie. The chamber fell silent. Accusations of dishonesty before the full council were not made lightly, and Zekthar felt the weight of 347 species' attention focus on him. For 50 millennia, we have maintained peace through a system of mutual assured destruction. Every species develops weapons capable of devastating others, and we call this balance. We have convinced ourselves that the threat of retaliation prevents warfare. But what happens when a species appears that doesn't fit into this paradigm? Zekthar activated a new display, showing recorded communications from the evacuation of Kepler 442b. The chamber watched human personnel working tirelessly to process refugees. their movements efficient and purposeful. The Vorthan Empire attacked Kepler 442b because they believed the mathematics of galactic politics supported their actions. They calculated that no other species would risk war over a frontier colony world. They were correct in their calculations, but completely wrong about the humans. Admiral Corvesh himself was present in the chamber, his scales still showing the faded scars from his ship's destruction. He spoke with the grudging respect of a warrior who had faced superior opponents. "Ambassador, the humans fought with tactics we had never seen, stealth technology that should be impossible, coordination that seemed almost telepathic. How do we defend against such capabilities?" Zekthar turned to face the Vorthan delegation directly. "Admiral, you're still thinking about this as a military problem. The humans didn't defeat your fleet through superior technology or tactics. They defeated you because they had a completely different reason for fighting." The chamber's display shifted to show excerpts from Zekthar's interviews with human personnel during the evacuation. Colonel Martinez's words echoed through the translation systems. "Every human here has been trained for warfare since they were old enough to hold a weapon. But we don't train for war because we love fighting. We train for war so that we can protect people who can't protect themselves. The humans," Zekthar continued, "are not a species that wages war for conquest, territory, or resources. They wage war to prevent suffering. This makes them fundamentally different from every other species in galactic civilization." Representative Quinara of the Etherian Collective spoke, her luminescent skin pulsing with skeptical patterns. "Ambassador, every species claims noble motivations for their military actions. What makes human claims different?" Zekthar had expected this question. He activated another display, this one showing current populations throughout human space. "The difference, honored delegates, is in the results. The Terran Confederation currently hosts permanent refugee populations from 47 different species. These are not conquest populations or labor forces. They are full citizens, with equal rights and representation." The statistics floating in the chamber's display drew gasps from several delegations. The humans had integrated more alien populations into their civilization than any other species in galactic history, including many species that were actively hostile to each other. "More importantly," Zekthar continued, "human military doctrine is based on something no other species has achieved: perfect defensive efficiency. They have created weapons and tactics designed not to conquer, but to stop conquest. Every human ship, every human soldier, every human weapon system is optimized for ending conflicts as quickly and cleanly as possible." Speaker Prime Unit 7744 projected confusion patterns. Clarification: if human military capability is defensive, why does galactic community experience fear response to human activities? Zekthar smiled, a gesture that had required careful practice when dealing with species that didn't use facial expressions for communication. "Because we recognize, on a level deeper than conscious thought, that the humans represent something we had convinced ourselves was impossible." The display shifted to show historical conflict patterns across the galaxy. Thousands of years of warfare, conquest, territorial expansion, and retribution created a web of connections that looked like a neural network made of violence. For 50,000 years, every species that achieved spaceflight followed the same pattern. They expanded until they encountered resistance, fought until they established boundaries, then settled into a balance of power with their neighbors. We assumed this was the natural order of things. Zekthar gestured toward the human section of the display, where their territories appeared as stable islands of multi-species cooperation. The humans broke this pattern. They achieved perfect military efficiency not to expand their territory, but to ensure that no one else could expand into territory that belonged to people who couldn't defend themselves. They became the galaxy's immune system. Council leader Threndok resonated with deep harmonics that suggested profound consideration. "You suggest that human military capability serves a protective function for galactic civilization as a whole?" "I know it does, honored leader. In the 6 months since Kepler 442b, the humans have intervened in 17 conflicts across the galaxy. In every case, they have defeated aggressive forces and protected civilian populations. They have asked for nothing in return. No territorial concessions, no trade agreements, no political advantages. They simply stop the violence and leave. Admiral Corvesh's scales darkened with uncomfortable truth. Ambassador, you speak as if the humans are some kind of galactic peacekeeping force. But who gave them this authority? Who appointed them guardians of galactic order? Zekthar turned to face the full chamber, his voice carrying the weight of conviction built through months of study and analysis. No one appointed them, Admiral. They appointed themselves. And that is exactly what makes them so terrifying to species who are accustomed to taking what they want through force. The chamber fell into contemplative silence as delegates processed this revelation. The humans hadn't asked permission to become galactic protectors. They had simply decided that suffering was unacceptable and taken action to prevent it whenever they encountered it. Honored delegates, Zekthar continued. We fear the humans because they represent accountability. For the first time in galactic history, there is a species powerful enough to hold other species responsible for their actions against helpless populations. Representative Morgath of the Sovereign Principalities spoke with the careful tone of someone testing dangerous waters. Ambassador, are you suggesting that the Council should formally recognize human authority over galactic conflicts? I am suggesting that we recognize reality, Representative. The humans already have this authority. They took it the moment they demonstrated that they could project power anywhere in the galaxy to protect populations that couldn't protect themselves. The only question is whether we acknowledge this reality or continue pretending that our old systems of balance and mutual threat still apply. Zekthar activated a final display, showing current galactic conflict statistics. The numbers were striking. Violent conflicts were down 73% from historical averages. Civilian casualties had dropped to levels not seen in recorded history. Several species that had been locked in territorial disputes for millennia were actively seeking diplomatic solutions rather than military ones. The galaxy is more peaceful now than it has ever been, honored delegates, not because we have become more civilized, but because we know that civilization now has guardians who cannot be bribed, threatened, or reasoned with when innocent lives are at stake. Council Leader Threndok's harmonic patterns shifted to serious deliberation. Ambassador Zekthar, what do you recommend as the Council's official response to human activities? Zekthar had spent weeks preparing for this question, consulting with experts across dozens of species and analyzing hundreds of scenarios. His answer was simple but carried profound implications. I recommend that the Galactic Council formally request that the Terran Confederation accept responsibility for galactic peacekeeping operations, not as overlords or conquerors, but as the species best equipped to ensure that stronger civilizations cannot prey upon weaker ones. The chamber erupted in shocked harmonics, clicks, whistles, and projected thoughts. Several delegations began immediate consultation among their members. The idea of voluntarily granting military authority to any single species was unprecedented in galactic history. Speaker Prime Unit 7744 projected urgent inquiry patterns. Ambassador Zekthar. Proposal suggests voluntary submission to human authority. Hivemind Collective cannot accept subordination to external control structure. Speaker Prime, you misunderstand the proposal. The humans would not have authority over internal governance or domestic policy of any species. Their authority would extend only to preventing aggressive warfare against civilian populations. Zekthar paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Ask yourself this. How many of your species' conflicts in the last 6 months have involved attacks on civilian populations? How many of your territorial disputes have required military action against helpless colonies? The silence that followed this question was profound. The answer, for the vast majority of species represented, was zero. Most galactic conflicts were political, economic, or territorial disputes between roughly equal powers. The kind of overwhelming assault on helpless populations that the humans had prevented at Kepler 442b was relatively rare. The humans would not be taking control of galactic civilization, honored delegates. They would simply be ensuring that galactic civilization remains civilized. Admiral Corvesh spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. Ambassador, having faced human forces in combat, I can tell you that their capabilities are unlike anything in our military databases. If they chose to conquer rather than protect, no alliance of species could stop them. Exactly, Admiral. And that is why the galaxy holds its breath when humans go to war. We know, instinctively, that we are witnessing the actions of beings who could dominate us completely, but choose instead to protect the defenseless. They are not threats to be contained. They are guardians to be grateful for. Zekthar deactivated his presentation systems and stood quietly while the chamber processed his recommendations. Around him, 347 species wrestled with the reality that their assumptions about power, politics, and galactic order had fundamentally changed. "Honored delegates," he said finally, "6 months ago I watched humans set foot on what we called the killing fields of Kepler 442b. I expected to witness another tragic example of galactic warfare. Instead, I watched 17 million lives saved by beings who asked nothing in return except the knowledge that suffering had been prevented." Zekthar looked around the chamber one final time, his 3 eyes taking in the representatives of civilizations that spanned thousands of worlds and billions of years of recorded history. The galaxy holds its breath when humans go to war, because we finally understand what we are seeing. We are watching a species that achieved perfect efficiency in violence not for the sake of conquest, but for the sake of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. They are what we all hoped we would become, but never quite managed to achieve. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated a future where the galaxy's most powerful military force was also its most reliable protector. I recommend we all learn to breathe easier. As the council session continued into the night cycles, species after species began to speak in favor of Zekthar's proposal. By morning, the vote was unanimous. The Galactic Council formally requested that humanity accept the role of galactic peacekeepers. The humans, when contacted, accepted the responsibility with characteristic efficiency. They asked only for cooperation in refugee resettlement programs and the establishment of joint humanitarian response teams. 6 months later, when the next major conflict erupted in the outer spiral, the galaxy watched human ships arrive not with fear, but with relief. The Guardians had come to protect the innocent once again, and for the first time in 50,000 years of recorded galactic history, the galaxy truly could breathe easier.